Everyone mocked her decision. A young, beautiful woman chose to marry a man in a wheelchair, and people said she was ruining her life. But on the wedding day, just before the vows were completed, the church doors suddenly opened. What happened next left every guest completely speechless. Stay tuned because you are about to watch a beautiful story and find out what happened next. Hello family, welcome to Tales by King. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful stories. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. In the busy city of Atlanta, life moved fast. People rushed to work every morning, chasing success, money, and comfort. In many places, people judged others quickly by the clothes they wore, the cars they drove, or the way they looked. But Sophia Carter believed something very different. Sophia was 27 years old and worked as a nurse at Riverside Community Hospital. She was known for being gentle, patient, and kind. Many of the older nurses often said that Sophia had a special gift. She did not just treat patients' illnesses. She treated their hearts. Every day, she greeted patients with a warm smile. She listened carefully when they spoke. Even when she was tired after long shifts, she never let her kindness disappear. One evening, the hospital was especially busy. The sky outside was dark, and rain poured heavily onto the streets. Ambulance sirens could be heard in the distance as the emergency department worked quickly to help incoming patients. Sophia had just finished helping an elderly woman when the main hospital doors suddenly opened. Two hospital assistants rushed in, pushing a wheelchair. Sitting in the wheelchair was a tall man in his early 30s. He had sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm face, but something about him looked distant, as if he had already experienced many disappointments in life. His legs rested motionless under a blanket. One of the assistants spoke to Sophia. "New patient," he said. "His name is Daniel Brooks. He needs observation tonight." Sophia nodded and gently took the wheelchair handles. "Hello, Mr. Brooks," she said politely. "My name is Sophia. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Daniel looked up at her. For a moment, he seemed surprised by how warm her voice sounded. "Thank you," he replied quietly. Sophia carefully pushed him down the long hospital hallway toward a private room. Inside the room, she helped him transfer carefully from the wheelchair to the hospital bed. She noticed something immediately. Daniel tried to move his legs slightly, but they did not respond well. Still, he did not complain. Many patients often felt frustrated or angry about their condition. Some shouted at nurses. Others refused help. But Daniel remained calm. Sophia checked his pulse and blood pressure. "Are you comfortable?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel answered softly. Sophia smiled gently. "If you need anything tonight, please let me know." Daniel studied her face for a moment. "You sound like someone who truly cares," he said. Sophia chuckled lightly. "That's part of my job." But Daniel shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "Some people only do their job. You sound like someone who cares beyond it." Sophia did not respond immediately. Instead, she adjusted his blanket and prepared his medication. Later that evening, after the hospital became quieter, Sophia returned to check on him again. Daniel was looking out the window at the rain. "Long day?" Sophia asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "They usually are." Sophia pulled a chair closer to the bed. "Do you mind if I ask something?" she said gently. Daniel turned his head toward her. "Go ahead." Sophia hesitated for a moment. "What happened to your legs?" Daniel remained silent for a few seconds. Then he finally answered. "A car accident 3 years ago." Sophia listened carefully. "It damaged my spine," Daniel continued. "Doctors said I was lucky to survive." Sophia felt a quiet sadness. "That must have been very difficult." Daniel smiled faintly. "The accident wasn't the hardest part." Sophia looked curious. "What was?" Daniel turned his gaze back to the window. "Watching people slowly disappear from your life." Sophia did not interrupt. Daniel continued speaking. "Friends who used to visit stopped calling. Business partners who once respected me stopped trusting me." He paused briefly. "And the woman I planned to marry left 2 months after the accident. Sophia lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Daniel shrugged slightly. "It taught me something important." Sophia asked quietly, "What is that?" Daniel looked back at her. "Many people only stay in your life when you are strong." Sophia thought about his words carefully. "Not everyone," she said calmly. Daniel studied her expression. "You really believe that?" Sophia smiled gently. "Yes." Daniel did not argue. Instead, he simply nodded. Over the next several weeks, Daniel remained under periodic treatment at the hospital, returning often for checkups and therapy. Each time he came, Sophia was usually the nurse assigned to him. Slowly, their conversations grew longer. They spoke about books, about life, about how people often hide their true selves behind appearances. One afternoon, after Daniel's therapy session, Sophia helped him outside the hospital for fresh air. The small hospital garden was quiet. Flowers bloomed along the walkway, and the sunlight warmed the benches nearby. Sophia pushed Daniel's wheelchair along the path. Some people passing by looked at them with curiosity. A young woman whispered something to her friend while pointing toward Daniel. Sophia noticed, but Daniel noticed it too. He smiled faintly. "You see," he said quietly. "See what?" Sophia asked. "People always notice the wheelchair first." Sophia stopped the wheelchair gently. Then she walked around and stood in front of him. "I noticed something else first." Daniel looked curious. "What?" Sophia smiled. "I noticed a good man who went through something difficult but still chooses to smile." Daniel stared at her in silence. No one had ever said something like that to him before. The days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. Their friendship slowly became something deeper. One evening, while sitting in the park watching the sunset, Daniel finally spoke the words he had been holding inside for a long time. "Sophia," he said softly. She turned toward him. "Yes." Daniel took a slow breath. "If I ask you something, will you answer honestly?" Sophia nodded. "Of course." Daniel looked nervous for the first time. "Would you ever consider marrying someone like me?" Sophia did not look shocked. Instead, she simply asked one question. "What do you mean by someone like you?" Daniel gestured slightly toward the wheelchair. "A man who may never walk again." Sophia looked directly into his eyes. Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes." Daniel blinked in surprise. "You didn't even think about it." Sophia smiled gently. "I did." Daniel waited. Sophia continued softly. "I thought about the kind man who respects others. The man who never complains. The man who still believes in love after people left him." She placed her hand gently on his. "That is the man I would marry." Daniel felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Within a few months, their relationship became official. Soon after that, Daniel proposed. And Sophia said yes. But outside their small circle of happiness, the world reacted very differently. When people heard that a young, beautiful nurse planned to marry a man in a wheelchair, many began to mock. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. And as the wedding day slowly approached, no one realized that Daniel had been hiding a secret that would leave everyone speechless. On the day of the wedding, as the news of Sophia and Daniel's wedding spread through the city of Atlanta, people reacted in very different ways. Some were curious, some were confused, but many people were judgmental. When Sophia's co-workers at Riverside Community Hospital heard about the wedding, they whispered quietly during their lunch breaks. One nurse shook her head. "I don't understand why she would do that." Another replied softly, "Sophia is young and beautiful. She could marry anyone." A third nurse added, "Life with a disabled man will be very difficult." But Sophia ignored all the whispers. She had already heard those same words many times before. Even some members of her own family struggled to understand her decision. One evening, a few weeks before the wedding, Sophia visited her Aunt Margaret, who had helped raise her after her parents passed away years earlier. They sat together in the small living room while drinking tea. Margaret looked at Sophia with concern. "My dear," she began gently, "I need to ask you something honestly. Sophia smiled softly. You can ask me anything, Aunt Margaret. Margaret sighed quietly. Are you absolutely sure about this marriage? Sophia remained calm. Yes. Margaret hesitated before continuing. I'm not saying Daniel is a bad man. From what you've told me, he sounds very kind. She paused for a moment. But marriage is long. Life can be hard. Sophia listened respectfully. Margaret continued speaking carefully. You will have responsibilities. Physical responsibilities. Emotional responsibilities. She leaned forward slightly. Are you prepared for a life where you may always need to take care of him? Sophia took a deep breath before answering. I have thought about all of that. Margaret watched her closely. Sophia continued softly. Aunt Margaret, when people talk about Daniel, they always mention his wheelchair. She paused. But they never talk about his heart. Margaret did not interrupt. He is patient. He is respectful. He listens. He never treats anyone badly. Sophia smiled gently. In a world full of strong men who treat women poorly, I found a man who treats me with kindness. Margaret slowly nodded. I see. Sophia reached out and held her aunt's hand. I'm not marrying his legs, she said softly. I'm marrying the man. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Then she finally smiled. If that is your decision, then I will stand beside you. Sophia hugged her tightly. Meanwhile, Daniel was also facing his own doubts. A few days before the wedding, he sat in his living room while speaking with his twin brother, David Brooks. David looked almost identical to Daniel, except for one difference. David stood confidently on his feet. Daniel remained seated in his wheelchair. David crossed his arms thoughtfully. Are you sure about this plan? He asked. Daniel looked serious. Yes. David shook his head slightly. It still feels unfair. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Unfair to who? To Sophia, David answered. Daniel looked down for a moment. I know, he said quietly. David continued. She truly loves you. I can see it. Daniel nodded slowly. That is exactly why I need to know. David leaned forward. Know what? Daniel's voice became calm but firm. If her love is strong enough to survive the world's judgment. David sighed. You've already seen that. Daniel shook his head gently. No. I've seen her kindness. He paused. But marriage is a lifetime. David remained silent. Daniel continued speaking. I spent 3 years watching people disappear when I became weak. He looked at his brother. This time, I need to know the person beside me will never leave. David studied his face carefully. You're afraid. Daniel did not deny it. Yes. David finally smiled faintly. Well, he said, you chose the right woman if loyalty is what you're testing. Daniel nodded quietly. The wedding day finally arrived. The church chosen for the ceremony stood proudly in the center of the city. It was a beautiful place with tall white pillars, large stained glass windows, and long wooden benches. Early that morning, workers decorated the church with white roses and soft golden ribbons. Soft piano music played gently as guests began arriving. Women wore elegant dresses. Men wore dark suits. But despite the beauty of the event, the mood among many guests felt strange. Some people came out of curiosity rather than happiness. 2 women sitting near the back whispered quietly. That must be the groom. They looked toward Daniel sitting near the altar in his wheelchair. Poor girl, one woman murmured. She must feel trapped. Another guest added quietly. Maybe she feels sorry for him. Across the room, a group of young men whispered among themselves. I heard he used to be very successful before the accident. Maybe she wants his money. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. Daniel heard many of those whispers, but he did not react. Instead, he remained calm and patient. His expression revealed very little. Meanwhile, inside the bridal room, Sophia stood in front of a large mirror wearing her wedding dress. The dress was simple but elegant. White silk flowed gently to the floor, and delicate lace decorated the sleeves. Her best friend Rachel helped adjust the veil behind her. Rachel studied Sophia's reflection carefully. You look beautiful, she said. Sophia smiled softly. Thank you. Rachel hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sophia turned toward her. Of course. Rachel looked serious. You know people are talking, right? Sophia nodded. Yes. Rachel continued gently. Does it bother you? Sophia thought for a moment. Not really. Rachel looked surprised. Sophia walked toward the window and looked outside. I've learned something about people, she said calmly. Rachel waited for her to continue. Sophia smiled slightly. Many people fear what they do not understand. Rachel crossed her arms. And you don't. Sophia shook her head. No. She turned back toward Rachel. I understand Daniel. Rachel smiled. Well, that makes one of us. Just then, the wedding coordinator knocked on the door. It's time. Sophia took a deep breath. Rachel squeezed her hand. You're ready. Outside in the church, the music slowly changed. Guests turned toward the large entrance doors. The doors opened slowly. Sophia appeared, standing gracefully at the entrance. Sunlight from outside framed her figure beautifully. The entire church became silent. She began walking slowly down the aisle. Some guests stared in disbelief. Others watched with quiet admiration. Sophia did not look left or right. Her eyes remained focused on Daniel. Daniel watched her approach. For the first time that day, emotion appeared on his face. When she finally reached the altar, she stood directly in front of him. Their eyes met. The pastor smiled warmly. Dearly beloved, he began, we are gathered here today to witness the union of two hearts. The ceremony began peacefully. Sophia held Daniel's hands gently as they prepared to exchange vows. Everything seemed perfect. But just as the pastor was about to continue, the large church doors suddenly opened. A tall man stepped inside, and the moment people looked at him, gasps filled the room, because the man walking toward the altar looked exactly like Daniel, except for one shocking detail. He was walking. For a moment, the entire church became completely silent. The soft music stopped. The whispering stopped. Even the pastor paused mid-sentence. Every eye turned toward the tall man walking slowly down the aisle. He looked exactly like Daniel. Same face. Same height. Same calm expression. But unlike Daniel, this man walked confidently on his feet. The guests began whispering again. What is happening? Is that Daniel? Then who is sitting in the wheelchair? Sophia stood frozen beside Daniel at the altar. Her heart began beating faster. She looked from the man walking down the aisle, back to Daniel in the wheelchair. Her voice came out quietly. Daniel? Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath. Meanwhile, the mysterious man finally reached the front of the church. He stopped beside the first row of seats and turned to face the crowd. The resemblance between the two men was shocking. The pastor looked confused. Sir, may I ask who you are? The man gave a polite nod. My name is David Brooks, he said calmly. And Daniel Brooks is my twin brother. The church filled with murmurs. A twin. No wonder they look identical. But the confusion in the room did not disappear. Instead, it grew even stronger. Sophia looked back at Daniel. Her voice trembled slightly. Daniel, what is going on? Daniel finally lifted his eyes toward her. His face showed a mixture of nervousness and sincerity. Sophia, he said gently, please trust me for a moment. The pastor stepped aside slightly, sensing something important was about to happen. Daniel slowly turned his wheelchair toward the guests. His voice remained calm, but everyone could hear the seriousness in his tone. I know many of you are confused, he began, and you deserve to hear the truth. The church became quiet again. David stood quietly near the aisle, watching his brother. Daniel continued speaking. 3 years ago, I was involved in a terrible car accident. Many guests nodded. They had already heard this part of the story. The accident damaged my spine badly, Daniel explained. For several months, I could not move my legs at all. Sophia listened carefully. Daniel continued. During those months, doctors were unsure if I would ever walk again. He paused for a moment. But something even more painful happened during that time. The guests leaned forward slightly. Daniel's voice grew softer. People I trusted began leaving my life. He looked at the crowd. Friends stopped visiting. Business partners stopped returning my calls. Even the woman I was planning to marry decided she did not want to spend her life with someone who might never walk again. The church remained silent. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Daniel sighed quietly. That was the moment I learned something difficult about the world. Sophia looked at him gently. Daniel continued. Many people love you when life is easy. But when hardship appears, he paused again. They disappear. Sophia felt her chest tighten. Daniel turned slightly toward David. My brother David stayed beside me through everything. David gave a small nod. Daniel continued. While I was going through therapy, doctors slowly began to see improvement. The guests looked surprised. Very small improvement, Daniel added. At first, I could only move my toes. Later, I could stand for a few seconds. And eventually, I could walk short distances. A ripple of gasps spread through the room. Sophia's eyes widened. You could walk, she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, but I decided to keep using the wheelchair in public. The guests looked shocked. One man in the back whispered loudly. Why would he do that? Daniel answered calmly. Because I wanted to see something. Sophia looked at him with confusion. What did you want to see? Daniel turned toward her fully. I wanted to see who would stay beside me, even if I never walked again. The room went silent again. Sophia stared at him. So, the wheelchair was a test. Daniel shook his head gently. No, it was my reality for a long time. He paused. But when my recovery began, I kept the wheelchair because I wanted to understand something about people. He looked at Sophia carefully. I needed to know whether someone loved me or loved the idea of a strong man. Sophia did not look angry. She only looked thoughtful. Daniel continued. When I met you, Sophia, I expected you to eventually leave like everyone else. Sophia's eyes softened. But you didn't. Daniel smiled faintly. You stayed when strangers laughed. You stayed when people whispered. You stayed when everyone told you that marrying a man in a wheelchair would ruin your future. He paused. And today, in front of everyone, Daniel placed both hands firmly on the arms of the wheelchair. I wanted the truth to finally be known. The entire church watched closely. Some guests leaned forward. Others held their breath. Slowly, very slowly, Daniel pushed himself upward. At first, his body trembled slightly, but he did not fall. He stood. Gasps echoed through the church. Sophia covered her mouth in shock. Step by step, Daniel carefully moved forward. The church fell completely silent as he walked slowly toward Sophia. His movements were steady but cautious. When he finally stopped in front of her, he looked into her eyes. Sophia, he said softly, I could have walked down this aisle today. He paused. But I wanted to know something first. Sophia's voice trembled slightly. What? Daniel smiled gently. I wanted to know if you would still walk beside me, even if I never could. Tears began forming in Sophia's eyes. Behind them, the guests sat frozen. No one whispered anymore. No one laughed anymore. Instead, the entire church watched one woman whose love had just been proven stronger than judgment. And now, everyone waited to see what she would say next. For several long seconds, the church remained completely silent. No one whispered. No one moved. Everyone was watching Sophia. She stood there in her white wedding dress, staring at Daniel, who was now standing in front of her. The man everyone believed could never walk again had just taken several careful steps toward her. Her eyes were still filled with tears, but they were not tears of anger. They were tears of emotion. Daniel looked nervous for the first time since the ceremony began. Sophia, he said softly, I know this may feel like a surprise. He paused before continuing. I did not mean to hurt you. I only needed to know something before spending the rest of my life with someone. The guests waited quietly. Sophia wiped the corner of her eyes gently. Then she looked at Daniel carefully. Daniel, she said slowly, did you think I would leave you because you were in a wheelchair? Daniel hesitated. I didn't know, he admitted honestly. Sophia nodded slightly. That's fair. She took a small step closer to him. You were hurt before, she said gently. People abandoned you when life became difficult. Daniel looked down briefly. Yes. Sophia continued speaking calmly. So you were afraid it would happen again. Daniel lifted his eyes again. Yes. The room remained quiet as everyone listened. Sophia then did something unexpected. She reached down and touched the wheelchair beside them. Then she turned back to Daniel. Do you know what I saw when I met you for the first time at the hospital? Daniel shook his head slowly. Sophia smiled softly. I saw a man who had every reason to become bitter. She paused, but chose kindness instead. Daniel's eyes softened. Sophia continued. I saw a man who treated nurses with respect. A man who spoke gently. A man who never complained about his pain. She took another small step closer. And most importantly, she placed her hand over his. I saw a man whose heart was stronger than his body. Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion. Sophia continued. So whether you walked beside me today, she glanced briefly at the wheelchair, or sat in that chair for the rest of your life. She looked back into his eyes. My answer would still be the same. The guests watched closely. Sophia smiled warmly. I would still marry you. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Peace. The pastor, who had been watching the entire moment quietly, smiled widely. Well, he said warmly, this may be the most honest wedding I have ever witnessed. The guests laughed softly. The tension in the room finally disappeared. Daniel gently held Sophia's hands. I'm sorry for the surprise, he said quietly. Sophia squeezed his hands. I forgive you, she replied. But next time, tell me your secrets before the wedding. The church filled with warm laughter. The pastor cleared his throat. Now, he said with a smile, shall we continue the ceremony? Daniel and Sophia nodded together. They faced each other as the pastor continued. Sophia Carter, do you take Daniel Brooks to be your husband, to love and support him through every challenge life may bring? Sophia answered without hesitation. I do. The pastor turned to Daniel. Daniel Brooks, do you take Sophia Carter to be your wife, to cherish her, protect her, and walk beside her through every season of life? Daniel's voice was steady. I do. The pastor smiled. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. He paused. You may kiss the bride. Daniel leaned forward and gently kissed Sophia. The church erupted with applause. Many guests stood up, clapping loudly. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. Even those who had whispered cruel words earlier now looked deeply moved. Outside the church, sunlight filled the warm afternoon air. Sophia and Daniel stepped out together, hand in hand. Reporters who had heard about the unusual wedding waited outside the building. Cameras flashed as they approached. One reporter asked loudly, Daniel, why did you test your future wife like that? Daniel smiled calmly. I didn't test her love, he replied. I revealed it. Another reporter asked Sophia, were you upset when you learned the truth? Sophia shook her head gently. No. She looked at Daniel with affection. I already knew the kind of man I was marrying. Daniel squeezed her hand. That evening, the wedding celebration continued with laughter, music, and dancing. Daniel's brother David walked over to the couple and smiled. Well, he said jokingly, that was definitely the most dramatic wedding entrance I've ever seen. Sophia laughed. I'll never forget it. Daniel looked around the room, filled with smiling faces. For years, he had feared love. He feared trusting again. He feared giving someone the power to break his heart. But standing beside Sophia, he realized something important. Not everyone leaves when life becomes difficult. Some people stay. Some people fight. And some people prove that love is stronger than fear. Later that night, as the guests began leaving, Sophia and Daniel stood outside the reception hall watching the city lights. Sophia rested her head gently on his shoulder. Daniel, she said softly. Yes. She smiled. You know something? What? She looked up at him. Today was not just a wedding. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What was it then? Sophia smiled warmly. It was proof. Daniel looked curious. Proof of what? Sophia squeezed his hand. That true love does not look at weakness. It looks at the heart. Daniel smiled quietly. And as they stood there together beneath the glowing city lights, he finally understood something deeply beautiful. The accident that once felt like the end of his life had quietly led him to the greatest blessing he could ever receive. Because sometimes, the person who chooses to walk beside you when life becomes hardest is the one meant to stay beside you forever. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you find this story worth watching. If you do, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful story, like, comment, and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Your support and engagement encourage me to post more videos. Thanks for watching.